Forex Focus brought to you by IG, bringing in Paul Capetta for what is a really, really interesting developing story here among Forex markets. The yen is losing value to the euro to the tune of more than a decade's worth of lows for the yen, highs for the euro. This hasn't happened since 2008. Yen hits new low against euro. Paul, I'm sure you've been monitoring this. Paul's actually been at IG in the US here for longer than anyone at the firm, been around for 4 years now, right, Paul?
Yes, yeah, it was 4 years actually last Saturday. So congrats on that. But yeah, the yen's been crazy. We're back to extremes that we saw in October. So it's an interesting one, but we'll see if we get any BOJ news that come soon.
Yeah, the Bank of Japan has absolutely been inserting some volatility into this yen market, but the bulk of volatility being to the downside here in yen. And Paul, this is always this is always going to be a USD first marketplace, right? We're talking about Forex here in the US, but sometimes you take out that USD part of things and you can see some really interesting extremes. And you look at this chart, and I don't care if they call it dirt, this is a really interesting chart, a market that has really been marching higher throughout the year and is now blowing through those highs of 158. And you've been around these markets for a long time here, Paul, and how often do you see, about midway through the year, thereabout, a few months to go still, and it's a Forex market, two major currencies. We're not talking about, the South African rand. We're not talking about the Mexican peso. We're talking about the euro and the yen. Two major currencies. You put them together, and they've moved 13% year to date. These are currencies that usually have sub 10% implied volatilities, meaning they usually move less than 10% on an annual basis. This is a big freaking move so far this year, and the year's not over, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's a huge move. Usually in FX, we get a little bit more of a bounce back and forth between some major key levels, but this has been a march higher, similar to what dollar yen did last year. Where we saw dollar yen get up to 155, and I know we're going to talk about that in a bit. But I mean, euro yen climbing this much in a single year, we're not even done through the year. We still have 4 months to go.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting where this could land. I think we're going to get into the highs of '08, and that's what we're marching towards with euro yen at 159 basically now, and dollar yen back to 145. So it'll be interesting to watch going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a key point there, which is dollar yen last year moving to those, multi-decade extremes and then coming off a little bit from those extremes. Let's bring in the next chart here that'll show you the historical extremes for euro yen. And this is, of course, the past is no indication of the future, but this looks a lot like last year's dollar yen chart, right? Where it's like you've got the looming historical high and you've got the market, last year dollar yen, this year euro yen, marching towards those highs. Dollar yen did break through those highs. We'll see if that's the future case for euro yen here, but again, solidifying the price extreme. Not only big volatile move here in 2023, and the year's not out yet, Paul, but you rope in as much data as IG has, and they've got some of the most data of any firm out there. Huge extreme, rose close to about 170 in 2008 before backing off all the way to 100. And of course, what's going on there, the financial crisis. But maybe speak a little bit to this extreme that we're seeing here, the march so far this year from around 140 up to 160 and where we've been historically here.
Yeah, sure. So, basically, so how I look at it is, the Bank of Japan has not made any attempt to raise rates or have tightened monetary policy. that's more of a growth story. It's starting to become an inflation story now as they're starting to see inflation tick up. So there's some worries there. But the Eurozone has taken a more staunch approach to inflation and getting that down, similar to what the U.S. did last year. But that's basically what we're seeing. Will we see some sort of BOJ reaction? It's possible. What level do they let it get to? That's also up for debate. With I know dollar yen, they let it get up to about 150 before they decided to intervene. So we'll see where that goes. And then just to highlight on the '08 point, we don't want to compare to '08 usually ever, unless it does happen again. But basically, what happens is yen is a risk-off currency. When things don't look good in the global economy, people tend to buy yen. As well as dollars and Swiss francs. So that's kind of what happens, and that's what you get when you get extremes in markets is you see dollar yen or yen basically appreciate.
Awesome. And yeah, let's get to the next piece that shows the dollar yen from last year, and to our earlier point, and to Paul's point of the Bank of Japan stepping in a little bit around 150. And a lot of times, all that being said, the Bank of Japan can say, hey, euro yen's up to 160, similar to dollar yen getting to 150 last year. We're going to step in and try to do X, Y, and Z. And the market can run them over. And that's happened historically. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the market has to move the way Bank of Japan wants to move. Last year, though, we did see that move up to 150. 30-year lows for yen, 30-year highs for dollar against yen, and the market backed off a sizable amount in the following months there, as you see them reaching 150 for the first time since 1991, and then coming off all the way to 130. And this brings in an interesting point that I always bring up with forex markets. In the next slide, you'll see a little bit of mean reversion aspect here. The fact that these markets have been around for so long, Paul, and they're not as liable to inflation. Of course, they move with inflation and interest rates, but they don't necessarily drift in one direction like a stock market does. These are currencies that come in and out of favor because of their economics, their central banks, and everything else. And you can't help but see, the 170 highs in euro yen, the 90 lows or 100 lows there, the range for the last 20 years plus, and inevitably coming back to that mean. Now, this market can go anywhere. You and I will agree on that. It can go up to 170, go up to 180, go do whatever. But these forex pairs do tend to show some mean reversion, right?
Yes, absolutely. When they mean revert pretty quickly, typically. But it varies on the situation. But yeah, I mean, if this were to mean revert, you would definitely need a Bank of Japan intervention, and then you got the market to back you up. You could see it really pull back.
Yeah, and to your point with the '08 crash there, it doesn't necessarily have to be the central. If the central bank steps in and they're really staunch on, we're going to either raise rates to get this thing back where it usually is, or the market crashes and people start buying yen, what have you, inevitably something does come through. But that being said, market could get to 170, 180 before that mean reversion here. And if we get to the next piece, you'll see exactly that idea. It's never necessarily as easy as, the average is 130, it's at 160, so I'm going to sell it. Trend followers have been obviously making money off this march from 140 to 150 to 160, and if I get short at 160 and it moves to 170 and I don't have the funds to hold on to that move, this is all to say risk and reward on both sides of this market. But let's actually conclude the show with where people are on this side of the market. This is a client sentiment tool from IG. And Paul, I'm going to just throw this to you because you've been in front of these measures for so long here at IG. What are we looking at?
I mean, we're looking at traders taking a very contrarian play that's looking at this move being overdone, and they think it's going to pull back. Will that happen? I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Should have a bunch of Fed speakers, a bunch of ECB speakers throughout August. So it'll be interesting to see what they have tuned up for the last quarter of the year.
Yeah, and very rarely do we see, a 75% or more sentiment, usually between, 50 and 60% long or short. But yeah, 3 out of every 4 traders at IG with positions in this market are short the euro, long the yen, looking for that contrarian play. We'll see what happens in the future here. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.